Welcome back.
I'm Gorilla.
And I'm Dax.
Yeah, today we'll be talking about the aquatic ape. I think one of the biggest problems, if you think about it, is its name, because it supposes that the apes sometimes live completely in the water, which I think is a misnomer if you think about it. I think that's one of its problems in acceptance.
So you're thinking like more along the lines of amphibious ape or something like that.
Well, ape sounds like a frog ape.
Well, I do get it though. Like if you call it like a semi-aquatic ape, then you're kind of creating unnecessary confusion about the whole thing. And I think the emphasis on aquatic is the fact that in competing hypotheses, it's just like not really considered, and a water-based lifestyle might be like a decisive part of our development. So I understand that it puts an emphasis on that, but what really catchy determinate name that would really describe it properly and really get somebody's attention would you propose? Because I frankly can't think of anything better.
No, neither can I off the top of my head. But there are other problems, like it's been dragged into mockumentaries where they propose mermaids and things, which is just ridiculous.
Well, it does it's not mainstream enough that you're probably going to raise some eyebrows if you say like, the yeah, Savannah hypothesis, blah blah blah. Well, I favor the aquatic ape theory. Then that's the type of thing that people will look at you with the same type of look in their eyes. Like if you say, well, have you seen that Ancient Aliens documentary on the History Channel? That was really interesting. Like that will probably get you the same kind of reaction. And yeah, I do see the name problem that you're kind of pointing out, but I don't know. I think that might be focusing a bit too much on appearances rather than substance.
Well, it has been growing in popularity amongst the scientific community. The Savannah theory still has a lot of advocates, despite being very little evidence for it, really.
Yeah, it's just whatever. It's just kind of something you consider to be the default position, but then when you kind of dig into it, yeah, it's being held to a relatively low standard of what you'd consider to be, yeah, worthy of being considered a mainstream scientific concept, just because it's what we grew up with and it's what you've been taught in school, and challenging something which is established seems to be a bit more of a difficult step to take than considering accepting something which isn't mainstream yet.
I think a lot
So
of it's to do with it's more like artwork and things like that. You know, like people thought dinosaurs looked a certain way, not because they were, just because early scientists hired painters and they just sort of guesstimated what they looked like. And like the colorations on dinosaurs could be completely different or something like that. And it's a similar problem, like early anthropologists drew them on the savannas hunting wild deer and things with spears.
yeah, I see what you mean. Like if you go into that, it took quite a while for like if you look at at some early popular science type of things or kind of ridiculous mainstream movies from even just a couple decades ago, like 1 million BC, that movie from the 1960s is obviously not particularly scientific, and it was already relatively ridiculous by the scientific knowledge based on the era. I think it's from 1966. But there you see humans who supposedly lived 1 million years ago, which are perfectly uh, they're just human actors without any costumes or anything. They're just humans, and they live among dinosaurs. And I think that's really one of those. It may be ridiculous, and it may have been ridiculous at the time itself, but that was a big blockbuster movie, and that really helps to contribute the popular image that a particular scientific concept has with the general population. And yeah, it might not be that outlandish, and I don't know how many people do believe that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time, which is obviously ridiculous. But that sort of thing contributes to it more than legitimate science, and finding a balance in that is kind of difficult. And a name like aquatic ape hypothesis or aquatic ape theory goes a long way towards the perception of that image. But that doesn't mean that you should lose track of the actual support and evidence and yeah, the standards that you hold before you can really accept the theory and consider it legitimate.
Well, the fossil record speaks for itself. I mean, obviously, humans like diverged from other apes somewhere between 2 million and 4 million years ago. There's discussion in that even.
Obviously, you can only go based on the information you have, and there might still be some fossil evidence that we haven't discovered yet that shows a particular timeline. But from what I know, my limited knowledge on this subject, I think the consensus up until about the 90s or 2000 used to be that the last divergence between us and the other great apes was around 2 million years ago. But then they discovered that fossil they named Artie in Eastern Africa in the early 90s, and research was published in 2009, I think, and that really showed a new branch of human ancestors which split off from the other great apes long before that. If you look at that, as far as I know, the closest living cousins we have are chimpanzees and bonobos, and we split off from those about 5.5 to 6 million years ago, and then they split off from each other like 2 to 2.5 million years ago. So they're closer related than they are to us, to each other. But yeah, as far as I know, the latest fossil evidence that we have access to shows that the last split off between what is still alive today as humans and other humans who have since died out, like Neanderthals and great apes, the last split off was over 5 million years ago. So I think there's some consensus on that. Obviously, that's open to revision if new evidence surfaces. But based on the available information right now, I think that consensus is relatively firmly established.
Yeah, because there are other human species which pre-existed with humans, as you just said. There is a very interesting thing between the other two Homo genuses which were alive with humans, including Homo erectus and Neanderthals, which is there's a bone in the human arm which it allows you to throw a spear, which they have and humans don't, which gives you more free range of movement in the shoulder.
I can throw a spear though.
Yeah, you can because you're a human being, but they couldn't raise their arm backwards in the same manner. So if they throw a spear, it would be just forwards momentum from the shoulder, like bicep forwards, rather than holding it behind your back and then throwing it forwards.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I guess a lot of that goes into it. I mean, if you want to properly throw a spear, that's already a relatively advanced tool, like a sharpened stick, and not just a sharpened stick that you stab in front of you. It's just a sharpened stick that you throw, and you don't just throw it; you throw it in a particular manner. Like to properly throw a spear, that's not just genetic adaptation which enables you to do that. That's training and experience. I mean, you can throw a spear, but if you want to properly throw it in a particular manner with your hand muscles and your fingers letting go in a particular order to kind of get the best result, like you see in like Olympic competitions or something, that's a whole other ballgame. So you can talk about genetic adaptation and the ability to maybe be able to do something like that more or less easily, depending on the placement of bones and muscles in your arms. But to actually properly determine how that affects practical probability of being able to do that back in ancient times, and how that would have affected survival probabilities, that's a whole other ballgame. And I just think that there's so many factors go into that's just not probable to really make any accurate predictions on that.
No, my thought was because free range movement of the shoulder would allow you to swim better.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but would it be probable cause that the other two Homo genuses had no aquatic ancestry?
That's conceivable, sure, but it might as well be that you're flipping cause and effect around. I mean,
you could well be true there. They may well have had similar sort of. They still need exposure to the iodines and the sort of omega-3s from the ocean.
Well, you may be right, but it might be the case that even assuming that we have some sort of option in shoulder movement that they didn't, you could like put that down to evolutionary pressures which led to that shoulder movement being possible and that placement in the bones from a result of having been more aquatic at an earlier stage of development. But you could also flip it around and say that that's just a random mutation which then led to a more aquatic lifestyle because that's what one group was more well adapted to than the other, and that's why one group is still around and the other's not.
Well, I know that on the island nations, there's neither Homo erectus nor Neanderthals managed to swim to any islands. Like the Pacific Islands were populated by humans a very long time ago, but only by humans, and during the same period as, well, Homo erectus may well have died out in that time, but Neanderthal was still around, but Neanderthal never made it to an island nation they couldn't walk to.
Well, isn't most of the Homo sapiens species that ended up populating the majority of the planet, didn't most of them travel to the more remote area? Like Aboriginals, like it's, as far as I know, it's generally accepted that they moved to Africa during an ice age when there were bridges that led to those continents. I mean, I see no viable reasons why Homo sapiens would have been capable of doing that in that time period, but other human species weren't.
No, I think for the native Australians, I think the migration patterns follows down from Asia through Polynesia.
Well, that's just one example, though. I think one of the last areas to be inhabited are like some remote islands in the Pacific Ocean, and there were only indigenous native people which went there and settled them only a couple of hundred years before Westerners came around and, quote, discovered them, unquote, met with massive genocides. But that's just one example. I mean, the Aboriginals are another example, but look at the Homo sapiens who populated the Americas. As far as I know, there's a consensus there that happened in only the last 10 to 20,000 years. But they probably...
it follows with the fossil record of the extinction of large predators, as it does in Eurasia as well.
Well, I did hear about some research a couple of months ago that apparently they found some hominid fossils and some remains of fire that were dated to be over 1 million years old. I might be completely screwing up my numbers here. It might have been over 100,000. Either way, it was a massive gap with the 10 to 20,000 years ago that humans are generally assumed to have settled the Americas. But the logical explanation, because that was such a giant gap between what was generally accepted and this new find, it was just hypothesized that it may have been a small isolated group of humans which went there long before that but didn't properly manage to settle just a small group and then died out, and then long after that, like tens of thousands of years after that, humans settled the Americas. But I think that's generally accepted to have happened during one of the ice ages when the Bering Strait was covered with ice, so you could just walk over it. And yeah, they did that about 10 to 20,000 years ago. So I don't see why Homo sapiens would have been capable of that, but other human species like Neanderthals wouldn't.
Neanderthals are a slight exception because they're only found in Europe.
Yeah, but why?
Well, they essentially evolved for the habitat of Northern Europe, and with the expansion of human beings, which were obviously more adaptable, they interbred and possibly died out. There's also the theory that they lived in smaller groups than humans.
Yeah, but if Homo sapiens trekked from Africa throughout the Middle East to Europe and then expanded outward through Asia, went over land bridges to the Americas, what about Neanderthals made it impossible for them to do that? Just taking them as an example, I mean, I think there were like 6 human species alive at one point. Yeah, what makes us Homo sapiens so special to be able to do that and the other human groups not?
Well, Homo erectus was relatively widespread, and obviously they found the pygmy species, which is, I think, up to the 18th century, isn't it? Which the last recorded ones.
I was about to bring that up. Weren't there a couple of the smaller species who lived on small island communities?
No, I think the
up
theory,
until relatively recently.
I think the theory was that they were populated by some subset of Homo erectus, which shrunk over time due to food resource constraints. Just like the miniature elephants on the island between the Bering Straits and Russia and America. Just because they were on a smaller food supply that they grew smaller, but they still had relatively high cognitive function compared to other apes.
Well, you could definitely consider them a subset of humans, but like I said, there were many. And if we're going to go into why we persisted and the others died out, then we have to go over a lot of factors, and I think that will take us longer than we want to. But Yeah, just the basic idea. Getting back to basics, like what is it? What makes us so special? Why did we get to this point? Why didn't the others? And how did we do that? What are the major differences? And what are the key changes in human development that distinguished us from the ones who didn't make it?
I think it comes down to luck, essentially. I mean, there are many other Homo sapien species alive at the same time which had more of them, and probably a higher genetic diversity. I mean, what is it? I can't remember precisely which Homo species it was, but one of them had the genetic diversity. They could be up to 2 meters tall to be 1 meter tall, and human genetic diversity doesn't allow that at all, pretty much. I mean, with the exception of certain genetic rarities.
Reminded of some research over the past 10 years that shows that Homo sapiens specifically is only now in like the 20th, 21st century reaching the level of physical capability because of quality of healthcare and nourishment that we're the average body size and the average age is rapidly expanding up to where you have some countries where 180, about 6 feet tall, is the average height for men, and that's unprecedented in recorded history. But that there was a point up until about 50,000 years ago where that was relatively typical, and then it dropped back off until only the last few decades.
Yeah, true. We are slightly stretching the aquatic ape, but that's I see your point.
Yeah, that's two different factors, though. I mean, obviously, the quality of life, average height, better physical state, and life expectancy, as we experience it right now, is due to advances in technology. But there was another cause tens of thousands of years ago when we still had a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle. That is a critical factor there, and I don't know what it is.
But yeah, to be honest, that's one thing which doesn't tie together very well with the aquatic ape at all.
What is?
Like some of the oldest genuses of humans in Africa walk in very hot environments.
Yeah, I guess, but that the people who, like nomadic people in say an extreme environment like the Sahara or parts of the Middle East, that's paired with I don't want to say technological superiority. I mean, it's not like they invented supercomputers, but that is using human intellect and making the most of tool use to a high extent, like digging wells, finding methods to figure out where sources of water are, rationing your resources, using particular rituals in your society to make sure that food supplies aren't stretched. Paying close attention to environmental factors like seasonal changes.
I have thought of a great
that's
not
genetic.
For this, actually.
That's not. I'm definitely with you on the point that people you could almost consider them extremophiles in the way that they manage to survive in extreme environments. But I don't think that's a genetic diversity type of thing. I think that's intellect and tool use mostly.
Oh, I think I've thought of a really, really good thought experiment for this, to be honest.
All right, shoot.
Which is, you're a human being. I'm a human being, obviously.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, we're human beings. But yeah, on the survival front, with no tools, no nothing, bare minimum of everything, where would you choose to be? Middle of the rainforest, a northern European forest, or by the seashore? Where do you think you'd have the most survivability?
Like all other factors in nature and in reality are unchanged. Like it's not like you can take out predators, or everything is just as it naturally would be.
Yeah.
Isolated tropical island with no with relatively close to the seashore. Like you can see like mainland in the far distance, and you could probably sail to it with a primitive boat, or maybe even swim it if you had enough energy. But just island, no large predators or anything, and kind of a castaway type situation. I think if you have to go down in the plane like Tom Hanks's character did, and end up at a particular place. It's not an ideal situation, obviously, but if you have to do it, you can't really get into a better habitat than he did. Yeah, tropical island, basic fruits, coconuts, access to wood, some growths that you can make rope out of, yeah, fish.
Yeah, well, what primarily would be the staple of your diet in that scenario?
Well, I think if you're in a scenario where you have an option for a varied diet, then that's already good. I mean, if you can get carbs from like tubers or root vegetables or potatoes, anything along that sort, and get some vegetables that grow on trees, and then be able to get your meat intake from small game or fish, then yeah, you not only do you not depend on one food source, so if some environmental factor changes, you're instantly screwed because you don't have backups. Not only do you have that, but just being able to get various nutrients from various food sources is a definite advantage.
Well, I could see this one. The easiest food source in that kind of scenario is the one you can get without tools. Like you could eat snails or cockles or even crabs. I mean, they're much more vulnerable than other animals. Like land animals are far better or poisonous or better at getting away from you. Yeah, as a human survival scenario, that really does tie in quite well with the aquatic ape theory. Because you're not entirely aquatic. Obviously, humans can't live in water permanently. Because
no, I mean, we're not. It's not like we're dolphins or whales or something, obviously. But I do see your point. I do have to bring up the fact that there are plenty of varied nutrient options and the sort in like a comparable environment like a tropical or northern European forest. I mean, you do have different vegetables and berries and roots and stuff growing, and various types of game that you could hunt. And if you're near a body of water, then obviously fish as well. But alongside that, yeah, I do see how we would be relatively advantaged if we live near a body of water to get, even if you're near a body of water and there are predators on the mainland, if you can swim and get away from the land predators who can't, that gives you a definite survival advantage as well, obviously. But it does depend, because your thought experiment goes on the premise of like.
Well, that would make more sense why women can swim better than men. I mean, that for a survival scenario, if that men don't have to swim because they don't carry children.
Women have an average higher body fat percentage than men, but there's plenty of explanations you could come up with. I mean, yeah, it gives you a survival advantage if you're more water based and you want to be able to swim. Surely, yeah, when women carry the children for 9 months and they need backup nutrients, that's that in a way that men don't, because we're essentially only have to worry about our own survival, and as long as we can ejaculate, we don't really have to worry all that much about reproductive concerns in the way that women do, because they actually carry the children. So having some extra body fat as additional nutrients for reproductive purposes is another argument to really consider there. But yeah, buoyancy is a factor, but then why specifically women? Why would what evolutionary pressure is there to give women a swimming advantage and not men? That argument kind of falls apart, if you ask me.
I suppose, but yeah, women do hold the same long distance rescues as men, comparable, especially in cold waters. But yeah, that's due to body fat percentage. But I take your point. I think
this is the matter of causation versus correlation. This little bit of trivia on the side here. I think the first person to swim across the channel between France and England was a woman in the 1920s, and she became a national hero because of it. But men had failed before and tried, and she was the first to do it. I would have to look up the specific article, but I just read that in a history magazine a couple of weeks ago.
I had known briefly about that statistic. But yeah, but based on purely survival, you would choose somewhere with accessibility to water, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, but you did point out earlier that humans are relatively inefficient compared to many other mammals who live in who compete for survival in similar environments because we need a lot of water.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another factor. I mean, we need water. We just need a regular water intake. So it's good to live by water by default. I mean, you need access to drinking water as a human, or otherwise you're not going to live for very long. Living close to water in an ocean-based environment isn't a particularly convincing argument in favor of the aquatic ape hypothesis, because humans in our current complexion can drink salty water and survive, and like there was a stage earlier in our development, at least in relatively recent evolutionary history, we could. And this kind of ties in with the question of if you consider the aquatic ape hypothesis, when would we have split off from other hominids to live in a more aquatic environment? Like, how long ago? Are we talking like development of Homo sapiens in our current form, like between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago? Or are you talking much earlier hominids, millions of years ago? And in that case, why are we the aquatic ones? And if there were other aquatic species, like the types of humans who split off from the main branch, and where are they now? And where is their fossil evidence?
There is an interesting caveat, actually, for living by the sea, because Inuit people drink no water.
Go on.
Because the human body can convert fat into sugar and water, and they can do it the same in inverse. It can turn water and sugar into fats as well. So I think perhaps if you were living off a predominantly sea-based diet, you may not have to drink very much water at all. Oils. Are you talking
fats. Like if you have a sea-based diet and you eat a lot of fish and stuff like that, and get a lot of fat intake, then you don't need the average daily water intake that we in the West do?
Yeah.
That I want to treat that with a little bit of skepticism, but I do have I do have something I saw in a documentary a couple of years ago that might be relevant to that. It was about this guy who was part of a shipwreck and like sole survivor, drifting around in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in a rubber boat, and just having to hope that the currents would like carry him to the Caribbean. But he was on there drifting for weeks or months without being found, and obviously had a little bit of a water supply and a couple of food packets that he managed to get from a survival kit in the rubber boat. But like one of the descriptions of the experience that he made that stuck with me was that when hunting for like fish or basically sea creatures that you could eat, was that obviously to most people, including myself, if you think of having to eat a fish raw, something you're not particularly looking forward to is the eyes. Like, yeah, eating a creature's eyes and seeing that it's still alive, and yeah, that kind of gives you a gag reflex, at least in my case. But that he told the interviewer in the documentary that became something he really looked forward to, because that eye was just a little bubble of fluid of just a little packet of water that you could survive off just another day.
Going for the hypothesis that humans need a lot of water from, yeah, we would if we lived on entirely land-based diet, which is like a lot of savanna animals are very low in fat because they have to be because they want to keep cool. Yeah, that makes a hell of a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, I gotta say, there's still plenty of cause for skepticism, but there are some compelling arguments to the aquatic ape hypothesis.
Yeah, see, I hadn't thought of that beforehand, and yeah, that is a very interesting hypothesis.
What specifically?
I didn't really think between the whole drinking water thing and seawater, and then actually you could live off fat. I knew those facts, but I hadn't put them together in my head.
Well, to really be able to, like I think you're definitely onto something. But to really be able to formulate that together into a definite argument in favor or against the hypothesis, you would have to analyze people with a more ocean-based lifestyle and check their water intake compared to the average land-based human, like a you or a me, like an average Western citizen. And compare how that water intake varies, and if there is a noticeable difference, where the difference really is. Like, why would group 1 or group 2 need a lower water intake? What are the causal factors that lead to that? And then if you really get a definite result out of that, then you have a strong argument for you there.
There's even more to that argument, which is human. The more salt you eat, the less water you have to drink, because your body is better at recycling water. And sea-based diet would be higher in salt.
I kind of want to call bullshit on that, to be honest. I think if you eat more salt, you get more thirsty and you want to drink more water.
No, that's not correct. No, I'm afraid you're incorrect there. If you eat more salt, your body uses less water. It's been studied on astronauts. Cosmonauts, more specifically.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree here, and that's taking aside the fact that excessive salt intake is linked to many cardiovascular diseases and other physical troubles. Excessive salt consumption is, especially at least as part of a Western diet, is linked to many illnesses. And there's, I think, government campaigns going in several Western countries to lower the average salt intake because it's causing a lot of health risks.
I understand that, yeah, but if you do eat more salt, you can more readily recycle water in your body, though it may have adverse health effects. But for evolutionary purposes, that doesn't matter, as long as you live long enough to be child-rearing age.
Yeah, that is a good counterpoint, but as for the salt thing, I want to treat this with a bit of skepticism, and I think for the time being we're going to have to agree to disagree.
That's fine, yeah. But that's an interesting caveat anyway, the body fat and water recycling.
Well, I think the important part here is to analyze the necessity of particular amounts of water intake for if you have a more ocean-based diet or lifestyle.
Yeah, that's probably more the interesting way to run it. That's certainly something we can diverge on.
Summing up, Aquatic Ape Hypothesis, definitely something to consider, a definite contender, but by no means an end-all be-all solution, because plenty of the arguments in favor of it can be met with some justified skepticism and have explanations to their arguments for why they would support the Aquatic Ape Hypothesis that would be more easily explained through other means.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on some bases which the theory has not even tackled itself. So we've added something to this. And yeah, I'm interested to what our 6 viewers will think.
Yes, all 42 of them.
I've been Gorilla.
I've been Dax.
And that has been the Aquatic Ape
Hypothesis.